Greetings and welcome to a new devlog for It Fades. In this devlog I want to show you the graphics I've been working on, the concept and how I've realized them. Initially I wanted to make this devlog about the gameplay, about the mechanics I want to implement, but they are stuck in a refactoring phase. Anyway, here we are at a small demo map I've made a while ago. As you have probably noticed last time, I went with a pixelized look for my textures and all of my models are low poly. I need to make sure all of my pixel sizes remain constant because some of these models look a bit too high definition for what I would like to have. I will talk about the grass and the other details later, including the water shader. Let's talk a bit about the original grass texture I used, the one you saw in the intro. I quite liked the look when I developed it, and I still quite like it. That's why the grass I have right now looks quite similar to this one. As you can see, it's nicely pixelized, it sways in the wind, well, in the fake wind, it's all generated by the shader. And it appears 3D. I don't know if you noticed really well, but it is tapered slightly towards the top. It's not just a cylinder of grass. There is a trick to it, a pro and a con. It is all perfectly flat. It's a single, let's see the wireframe, it's a single plane. Well, in this case it's a higher division plane, but that's irrelevant technically. Would have been just a 2-try plane. It's all made from the shader, it's all through parallax. All the entire 3D aspect of it. Right now on the flat plane it doesn't really look a lot like anything, but if I place it on a grassy texture, it suddenly blends in a bit better. It even follows the camera because that is why I went with the parallax method. However, it has one quite large problem. Actually, it has a few problems, but the largest problem is the performance. Just a couple of these grass objects in my world destroys performance. So I really needed to get rid of them. The other problem is that being a plane, it looks fine on a flat plane, well, as long as you get the right height so the parallax functions correctly. But the moment you bring it to a plane, to an inclined plane, suddenly, even if you manage to place it in a way that doesn't hit through the ground, there is still an obvious floating issue. On one part of it is obviously floating, the other one seems to weirdly clip into the ground. It doesn't move fine at all. Even the newer grass I use still has this problem, but I've used a couple of tricks to make it look a bit better. So this is the original grass texture. This is the shader I've used for it. As you can see, I take a generated noise texture and I basically calculate it multiple times and subtract each layer from the previous one so that the layers don't clip into each other. Don't forget that this is all one single texture that mimics following the camera. It's not actually 3D. That is why I had to do this shitty subtraction method. And yeah, this is why it also destroys performance. And this is the new grass, which has some differences which are obvious. It's more from how I designed it more than the method I used to generate it. If we look at the mesh, instead of having one single plane, we have multiple planes. Now each layer is its own plane. They can move independently for the wind. I think I could one day even integrate the scene wind into this one so the grass moves naturally. It has the same way to control it. It tapers the same way, slightly upwards. The colors of each layer are controlled through the shader. It's an improvement. Plus, it's way more optimized than the previous one. It uses a texture to generate the noise. I can also control and make different versions of it, and I can control more parameters for it, and including the tip color and how far the color goes down through the layers. And as you can see, I can even make smaller blades of grass in case I need this placed in a corner or a inclined plane. And exactly the same method I've used to generate this is supposed to be a bush. It looks a bit ugly, but trust me, it's a bush. And a couple of trees. In this case, it's a colored tree. And even larger ones. Mind you, right now they look spherical in nature. This is just the way I drawn them. As you can see, the bush is oblong in shape. It all depends on how I generate the textures for each layer. I can very easily give them different shapes. These as well, like the grass, each layer is a different plane. The only problem, you can't really notice it on the grass, but on the trees it's really obvious. They look fine from above, but the moment you go down, all the layers start to be extremely obvious and even invisible when watched from below. I could make the shader render on both sides, but it feels like cheating. It's not really a solution, so I'll need to look into this. And I could demonstrate here with a little example I've built how slightly better the grass fares with inclined planes, because each layer is independent. It clips slightly nicer through inclined planes, and because I can generate smaller pieces of grass, the problem would be solved even better. For reference, this is the texture I've generated for the foliage you've seen just now. Up here and down here I have the noise for the trees, each image being a different layer for the tree. Here in the middle I have the noise for the bush, and to the side all the variants of the grass. Just slightly tweaking a couple of parameters can yield different versions of grass. I don't really need a lot of versions of the noise. Going back to the terrain, I would like to speak a bit about the shader I've built for it. Instead of going with one statically generated texture for the entire terrain, I've instead made a shader that blends multiple textures together. For example, if I look at the gradient here between grass and sand, I could very slightly tweak it. I can raise the weight of the grass and make it flow into the sand. Or for example, if I want, let's say it rains or something, I can make a layer of mud appear from below the grass and just take over. It's a pretty neat shader that not only allows me to use small textures blended nicely together, but also lets me dynamically change the environment to suit my needs. Initially I used just 3 textures with a mask like this one, each channel of the RGB texture representing the weight of a different terrain texture, but in the end I discovered that 3 textures aren't enough. Well, I could have used the alpha channel as well to let me use a 4th texture, but it still wasn't enough. That's why I switched to a mask texture that uses 9 slices. It's a bit harder to notice each slice, they're split like this, each one representing a different texture, so I can go up to 9 textures. Of course, this one could be optimized as well. Instead of using RGB equally to represent a texture, I could split them up as well to let me use 3 up to 4 different textures per slice, so I could optimize it easily as well. However, for now it's quite sufficient. And just as an example, this is the texture atlas I'm using for basically every object in the environment. The terrain texture looks a bit messy, but, well, it is messy, but technically it's quite simple. I could optimize it as well, I guess, but for the moment it works quite fine. Basically I have to extract it from its atlas, and with a small shader script I calculate which texture should have priority, and basically that's how I write the final color to the pixel. I have a shader in the works that is way more wieldy to use, and it also lets me extract the color of a specific pixel. It will be very useful, for example, when a character steps and I need to play a sound for the correct material they step on. I also wanted to show you the water I've made. It's imperfect, but I quite like, well, half of the result. I like the sharp edges of the lighting. I don't really like the foam I've generated. It's way too higher definition compared to everything else in the scene. I will need to either pixelize it or maybe remove it entirely. It has a nice transparency where the water is shallow and slowly becoming more opaque. The shader as well is quite a mess. I will definitely need to improve it. However, right now I'm going to be honest, it does its job. Can't say more. It's fine as it is. Trust me. And here are the two characters I've developed so far. The fox, the player character, and a wolf, a companion we'll often meet on longer travels. When I first created these characters, I went with a very painterly look, very high definition. For example, you can see the brush strokes and texture on it. Same with the clothes. However, it doesn't really fit right now with the style. I think I will probably go with a slightly pixelized texture. Maybe this is a bit too much. I'll have to see. I'll probably go with something like this. Not quite as pixelated as the environment, but still giving a bit of more detail. Mind you, right now these edges look a bit ugly because the UVs have been created for the high definition textures. When I'll retexture the characters with the pixelated concept, I will make sure to make the edges look clean. It's all about style. If you like the art style and the graphical direction I'm going in, I have some good news and some bad news. The good news is that I already know what I want to do, and the bad news is that this is more or less the best we get to see the game look. I'm way more interested in getting the gray boxing of the maps done to get the layout and the gameplay fixed and focused. I'm very much not planning on focusing on the graphics before anything else. I know that on YouTube videos the graphics are basically the only thing you can clearly see, and the feature videos map design will look worse than this, but well, this is how game development works. Sorry. And as an example of gray boxing, or well, ochre boxing in this case, this is how the first map will look like. It's already laid out, all the paths you would take, all the zones you would need, and this is more or less how it will stay for a good while now. Only once everything is 100% done, I will start designing how each building will look like, how the map is supposed to be textured. It's very much at the bottom of the priority list. So yeah, this is what you will be seeing for a good while now. And this is what I wanted to show you for this devlog, how the graphics of the game are going to be, how I thought them out, how I will proceed in the future with them, and I will leave you here at the top of the watchtower next to the remnants of a castle. Ignore the wizard's tower there in the background, it's supposed to be invisible, otherwise the civilians would go crazy. Thank you for joining me, and see you next time. Ciao!